Awesome. So thanks everybody so much for joining. My name is Tessa Archibald. I'm a policy associate for the Animal Welfare Institute, and I manage the Homes for Horses Coalition. Just a couple things to keep in mind as we get started. Please stay on mute just so we can hear our speaker clearly, and this will be recorded and available to share. So if you have to hop off, no worries. We will try and save questions to the end. We'll have a little bit of time then, so hold on to those or put them in the chat so you don't forget. And if you do want to turn your cameras on and hang out, that would be great, but no pressure. Many of you joining today are members of the Homes for Horses Coalition, but for those of you who aren't, I can share a short introduction. The Homes for Horses Coalition has been active since 2007 when it started as a unique coalition to help horse rescues and ultimately help equines by ending horse slaughter. Today, HHC is led by the Animal Welfare Institute and American Wild Horse Conservation and has over 500 members who are equine rescue directors, equine professionals, and equine advocates. HHC is dedicated to providing spaces for collaboration and connection within the equine rescue world, as well as furthering advocacy to improve the lives of equines through legislation and policy. So we have a fantastic speaker with us today, Jane from Montana Horse Sanctuary. For 30 years, Jane Heath, co-founder of Montana Horse Sanctuary, has relied on herbs, to help horses maintain health and heal from a variety of conditions, including malnutrition and abuse. Jane first observed her own horses selecting herbs while grazing, and the herbs always matched the needs of their bodies. In 2000, when she started rescuing and rehabbing abused horses, her experience widened into herbs to heal the numerous effects of malnutrition, such as poor digestion, ulcers, body pain, hoof issues, and poor immunity. Today, she creates custom herb blends for her Circle of Life equine therapy clients and is based out of Stevensville, Montana. You can learn more from Jane at janeheathcircleoflife.com. I think that was in the chat as well. You can subscribe to those newsletters to learn more and stay up to date. And Jane, please take it away.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really exciting to see such a nice group. And of course, having been in rescue this many years, I know how precious your time is. So that makes me doubly grateful that you're here. I'm also really excited that there are more and more people all the time getting interested in using herbs with horses. When I started using herbs with horses years ago, I really had a hard time finding a community of people who also did that. I kind of felt a little like the lone wolf doing it, but now it's a lot more common, and there are a lot more companies offering herbal blends for horses, as well as more people becoming horse herbalists and doing it, whether it's just for their own herd or their own rescue. Um, like I say, it's growing, and that's very gratifying to me. So, excuse me. I'm just on the end of a cold, so I'm a little croaky. I'm going to have to pause every so often to get a glass of, or get a little drink of water here. Anyway, so I'm going to do the disclaimer thing right off the bat. I'm not a veterinarian, and this isn't veterinary advice. This does not substitute for veterinary care at all. And certainly, our organization over the years has tapped into many veterinarians, like most of you have. You need different kinds of vets for different things. We work with veterinarians who do alternative therapies, but we also, of course, tap into veterinarians and use veterinarians who do purely conventional medicine. And I'll say this perhaps a couple times during the webinar. Make sure that if you're using herbs, your conventional veterinarian knows what you're using during treatment of a horse. And when I say horse, I mean all equines. I'm just going to leave that all inclusive, because it's really important that they know what the animal is taking, in addition to the medications they're giving. And I know that a lot of veterinarians still aren't very aware of herbs, but they can tap into databases to get the information they need. And a lot of the veterinary schools are now offering herbalism as continuing education or even part of the curriculum for veterinarians. So the information that they need about herbs being on board when medications are on board, is out there for them. It's available. It's not like it used to be. So, um, let's see, by a show of either a hand or in the chat, how many of you are already using herbs with the horses in your care? Okay, so since I can't see most of you, and that's okay, no worries. It just gives me an idea who all's using it. As Tessa said, I started really using herbs for my horses about 30 years ago. And that's at the same time that I started my Circle of Life equine therapy business. And I do craniosacral and massage therapies with horses, in addition to the herb blends. Um, but I first became aware of herbs or was introduced to herbs by a friend of my mom's when I was a kid. I loved gardening, and Peg knew that how much I loved gardening and horses. And she introduced me to the herbs in her garden, which were the very basic garden kind of herbs, rosemary, mint, lemon balm, feverfew, those kinds of things. And I was instantly attracted to them. There was just almost a similar connection that I had had years before with horses. Um, and so herbs go way back in my background. And while I don't raise the herbs that I use for my blends for the most part, because I'm not certified organic, although I do completely organic practices here. I grow a lot of my own herbs for my own use and for my own horses' use, but I just don't have the kind of scale that I would need in terms of being able to raise, hundreds of pounds of herbs a year for my clients. But I'll tell you a little further on where I find really good herbs. I've got some great information to share today. We'll save questions till the end, but by all means, put them up in the chat and we'll make sure we have time to get to all of those if possible before we hang up. We can even go a little past 1, Tessa tells me. And so, horses are natural herbalists. Like Tessa said in the introduction, I've observed horses eating what they need out in pastures. Unfortunately, our current care of horses usually includes pastures that are monocultures or very little diversity for them to work on and to eat and to help themselves with. In the wild, horses will go a long way to get to plants that they need to heal their bodies. And horses are really good, if they're allowed to, at determining how much they need. Unfortunately, that's not a real easy thing to do nowadays. So we kind of have to play with what we think they're going to like best and what they respond to. For almost any given condition, there are a number of herbs that'll work for a horse. And so sometimes I find with horses that I have to play around with the formula until we land on the right combination. It's not always instantaneous. And sometimes their tastes change over time as the condition resolves. Very often, they'll just stop an herb blend or a particular herb and say, okay, well, it did its job and now I'm all done with it. Horses don't always initially like herbs. And I think a lot of that is due to the current diet we give them. A lot of the feeds that are bagged are heavy in molasses. Horses end up with a real sugar craving and a real sweet tooth. A lot of herbs are bitter. And so horses kind of think, wow, I don't eat bitter foods, I eat sweet foods. And over the years, as I've taken horses off of sweet diets, um, their desire for more natural, healthy foods increases. It's just like humans. If we kind of get into a phase where we're eating a lot of sugar, I mean, the holidays are a great example for a lot of us, probably, where we're eating a lot of sugar, and then we go back and start, getting that healthy food back into our diet, say at the 1st of January, right? It's a little like, wow, this doesn't taste that great. But then after a week or so getting off sugar, wow, it tastes great again. So horses, I've seen, experience that a lot. Very often, if they're refusing herbs, um, it's a good sign to look at the rest of the diet. And it's also good to know that good herbs can't override a bad diet or bad practices where they're being exposed to a lot of toxins, and a lot of foods that just are not truly horse food. There's a lot of bagged feed out there. Unfortunately, not a lot of it contains the things that are truly healthy for horses, or that horses evolved to eat, or eat in the quantities that they're getting them out of bagged feed. Um, the whole bagged feed topic is another webinar for another day. Anyway, so what is an herb? It's basically a plant with healing properties, which means almost every plant that a horse puts in its mouth has some type of healing property. It can be completely nutritive, but it can also be a medicinal or healing quality. And I like to say healing because I think of medicines as being more the conventional pharmaceutical side of the world. Some herbs are very strong and act quickly. Some are more what we call nutritive, and they're a little more gentle, but that doesn't mean they're not powerful. But they can work in a long-term sort of fashion. And today the herbs that we're going to talk about are primarily on that nutritive side. They're just a little gentler, nice way to get horses going on herbs. Herbs can come from any part of the plant, you know, the sap, the berries, the bark, the roots, the leaves, and the stems. So the niche that Montana Horse Sanctuary filled in rescue and sanctuary world was primarily horses from abuse cases. It was a natural outgrowth of my work as an equine therapist to want to go into rehabilitating horses who were in really bad condition. Um, it's just something that really speaks to my heart and did for years. We're no longer actively rescuing horses. We've taken on a little different mission, but we over the years rescued a lot of horses. And so I had the opportunity to start working more deeply with these horses with herbs and helping them go from sometimes, you know, as many as 10 years of abuse and neglect, which is not uncommon, unfortunately, with Montana abuse cases. From there back to health, and usually over the course of 2 years. It takes time for the body to rebuild. But what I figured out pretty early on is that the first thing we had to address was the digestive system. None of the horses came to us who weren't badly affected digestively. And that really means from the mouth all the way out the other end. So the entire digestive system. So often we talk about just the stomach as if that's the sum total of the digestive system, because ulcers are such a big focus. And we got to a point where we always assumed that every horse who came in had ulcers, because if they hadn't been eating regularly or they were eating bad hay, and worse yet, eating inedible things like sand and rocks and so forth to fill their stomach, they had ulcers, period. End of story. Stephen Duran, Dr. Stephen Duran, came and did a workshop for us some years ago. And he's a PhD equine nutritionist. And he said then, this is about 10 years ago, at that point, he said, about 65% of horses will get an ulcer within 3 days of travel. And that didn't mean travel across the state to go to a workshop and work for 3 days and drive home. That meant down to the vet clinic and back. He was really clear that even the shortest travel distance can result in an ulcer in 65% of horses. He also said that 93% of horses will get an ulcer at some point in their lifetime. That really hit home with me because it started making me think that horses who go through years of abuse are definitely going to have ulcers and other digestive issues. And again, you know, who knows what all is going on through the rest of the digestive system. It's just that the stomach is the easy part for vets to look at endoscopically. They can't get much further than the duodenum with an endoscope. And they can't get far up the other end, the rear end, with an endoscope either. So it leaves a lot of digestive system in the middle that's kind of a mystery still. So the first thing we want to do with a digestive blend, our goals for that are to first address gut pain. Because if their gut is bothering them, if their gut is unhealthy, it hurts just like ours does. If our stomach is going through problems, we have a stomach ache, even if it's just a little one. And in a lot of cases with these horses who are survivors, it's a big one, but they're not letting us know. The next thing we want to do, the next goal is to heal the gut lining. The gut can heal pretty rapidly. Doesn't mean it's fully healed, but it can get itself on its way to recovery with pretty minimal effort. So for instance, let me show you something I love. It's called marshmallow root. And I soaked some today, and I don't know how well you're going to see this on here, but it's really gooey. It's called a mucilaginous herb. You can kind of see when it drips from my fingers. It's like mucus, and mucus protects the body. And it'll kind of coat the gut, and it also causes or creates some healing on contact as well. Marshmallow root has some really great constituents in it, and I'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes. But a lot of times, the herbs that we're talking about, very first and foremost, are those mucilaginous herbs that soothe the gut and start calming it down so that it feels better and it can heal. We also want to rebuild a healthy microbiome. And please don't send me questions about probiotics, because right now I am not up to speed on probiotics. I will freely admit that. That's a field that is leaping forward so fast. I find it impossible to keep up with. But there are a lot of great probiotic formulas out there for horses. I recently took a webinar from an MD, and it was about gut health for humans. And she said on that webinar, when you take antibiotics, you basically set off a nuclear bomb in the gut, or the equivalent of a nuclear bomb in the gut. Now, we all know sometimes we absolutely have to use antibiotics with our horses. I'm not saying don't do that, but I am saying you can really support the horse through the antibiotic course and beyond, so that you help the gut keep healing. One of my own horses that I adopted from the sanctuary years ago, Isaac, went to surgery 3 years ago for a cyst in his sinus at WSU, Washington State University, at the vet school. And of course, because they were entering the face, right below the eye, they used massive antibiotics on him. And he was my guy who had platinum digestion. I mean, he was just really the pinnacle in terms of digestion. And it blew out his digestion completely, to the point that my local vet, once I had him back home, saw the diarrhea and said, "Oh my word, stop before we kill him." And called the vet at WSU and said, "I'm going to have her stop it. I'll keep a close eye on this horse, but we got to quit now." And it took almost until now, almost 3 years, to get his digestion back to where it was. And that was herbs, probiotics, and all kinds of stuff, homeopathy. So yeah, it's been a long journey back. So it really gave me an even keener awareness of how much we can affect what had for, 15 years been a very stable, healthy gut. Next thing we want to do is, next goal we have is to remove toxins from the gut. We talked about the sand, the dirt, the fences they've eaten, the buildings they've eaten when they're starving, things like that, as well as whatever they're getting in their food when they're with their previous home. And I know for some of you, if you're primarily rehoming horses from home to home, you're not perhaps going to see this level of issues, but it's still worth thinking about that we want to get anything in the gut that shouldn't be there out the other end, but slowly. Um, you can't take a gut that's dysfunctional and expect it to move all the sand and the dirt out in a few weeks or even in a few months necessarily. That can be a process that takes a year or so. Um, and we'll talk a little bit about the herb that I like best for that. But mostly what we're trying to do is increase their motility and the volume of their poop so that we make sure things are moving along in a healthy way and there's actually enough volume to the poop to help take that out. So let's talk about a few herbs for digestion. I have 4 favorites that I just use again and again because they work so well. And the first one I start with is peppermint leaf. Horses love peppermints, as we know. It's a really great natural match for almost every horse. Now, it might be one horse in 100 that doesn't like peppermint, which always surprises me when they don't. Usually I find if I back off on it, take it down to just a pinch in their food, they'll usually start accepting it and liking it and going, oh, this is cool. This works. Um, Peppermint is analgesic directly to the gut, which is really cool. It means it's killing pain as it's going its way through taking its way through the system. It's relaxing to the gut, so anything that's wanting to tighten up tends to relax a little more. That means you have better motility, gas is passing more easily. It's also anti-parasitic. Now, it does not mean it's going to go through and clean out all the parasites. What it does mean is it discourages parasites. They don't like that strong pepperminty smell, I think. And there are probably other constituents that bother them about peppermint. So you're slowly starting to clean some of those parasites out as well, which is really cool. Um, excuse me. It's also highly nutritive. It has a great mineral profile. Um, and it's a little bit antibacterial and it just moves stagnation in the body, which is one of the reasons that peppermint and menthol are so great. Like when you have a cough or a cold to help clear things out. The one caution with peppermint for those of us who live in these northern tier states is that it can be a little too cooling. If you're giving a lot of peppermint to a horse who's a little bit of a chilly body, and if you need to keep doing that through the winter, you can balance that out with a little more warming digestive herb like ginger root or fennel. Both of those are more on the warming side, and that'll balance out that sort of chilly feeling that horses can get and we get when we eat peppermint. The next one, oh, and I was going to show you as I go through. So these are my herbs. And I'll bring those up as close to my camera as I can. So that's peppermint leaf. And I buy it as leaf and then I grind it to a powder. I like having it stay in the ground sifted leaf because it keeps more of the volatiles intact until I'm ready to use it. I wish we had smell-o-vision because it just smells phenomenal. And it should always be nice and green. It's not going to be bright green. It's kind of like hay. If your herbs don't look like good hay, then wonder about them, especially the herbs that are the top part of the plant. Roots will look like a different color. So, for instance, marshmallow root naturally looks, let's see here, kind of tan colored. And this is powdered. And I buy this powdered because it is so hard to grind it if it's not powdered. If it comes in as shredded root, you have to have a really good grinder for it. And I do have a good grinder. I have a Vitamix back in the corner here, as you can see. And it does great grinding, but there's no point wearing my blades out on something that is just as easily bought as a powdered herb. It's a few cents more per pound. So marshmallow root, we talked about how it's mucilaginous. And its name actually does come, marshmallows, the name comes from marshmallow root. Our ancestors made a confection, a sweet that was, they called marshmallows, but it's not the same as jet puffed marshmallows today. My suspicion is that that original sweet might have been how they got their kids to take marshmallow root when they had a tummy ache. It's a really gentle flavored herb. And again, the majority of horses really like it. It's an easy herb for them to get to like. It's also great, has an interesting quality. Sorry, I keep dropping my clipboard here. Has an interesting quality that when marshmallow root reaches a certain place in the digestive system, it comes in contact with a nerve that connects to the digestive system, and it triggers that nerve to create looser mucus in all of the systems of the body. Um, the name of that nerve I can't remember right now, sorry. But so if you drink marshmallow root tea, for instance, or you give a horse marshmallow root, if they also have a cough or sinus crud, it's going to loosen that mucus and help it flow more easily. It'll have the same effect on bladder issues and mucus anywhere else in the body. You know, we don't want mucus to dry up and get sticky, right? We want mucus to be loose and flowing so that it gets, you know, virus, toxins, whatever it is, allergens out of the body. It's why the body produces, one of the main reasons the body produces mucus. Excuse me. So, definitely make sure when you're adding anything that's mucilaginous, like marshmallow root or psyllium, that you're adding it to wet feed. And this is what I have mixed up for my guys. For mid-afternoon today, they'll get their herbs mixed in with this. It's just soaked organic hay pellets. They're not sloppy or wet. They're just nicely dampened. And then I'll stir in the herbs to that. So the next herb on my list that I love is meadowsweet. It has basically the same chemical constituent as aspirin. Um, and you can either get it as just the blossoms, but I like the whole aerial parts. And by aerial parts, that means the above ground portion of the plant. Meadowsweet is Filipendula ulmaria. Occasionally you'll find another herb called meadowsweet as its common name. Make sure that you're getting Filipendula ulmaria. So because it's like aspirin, the first question in almost anyone's mind is, oh, wait, that's going to irritate an ulcer, right? Well, interestingly enough, nature said, you know, if we're going to be irritating, then we have to balance that. And meadowsweet is naturally mucilaginous, not to the same extent that marshmallow root is, but it's enough that it protects the gut. So it doesn't cause that kind of ulcery reaction in the gut the way aspirin or bute would. So it also makes a great herb for other pain issues, but it also helps the gut heal. And again, it's helping with that pain. The next one I love is calendula. And calendula, we use the blossom only. We don't use the stems. So these are calendula blossoms that I grew in my garden. When you buy calendula, it should be pretty much anywhere from this soft yellow to a brighter yellow orange. The variety that I grew, when it dries, comes out just a little softer yellow, but it has a lovely smell. And the constituents in calendula increase skin cell production, and it's also directly healing. Calendula is something you'll find in a lot of salves and skin lotions because it helps the skin heal. And the lining of the gut is almost the exact same kind of cell as our external skin. Finally, psyllium husks powder is another one I like. And oh, I'm sorry, I don't have that one out, but it looks a great deal like marshmallow root. It also gets very slimy, and it's the same stuff that's in Metamucil. But the main thing, the really big caution, and it's a caution with all herbs, is make sure you're not buying psyllium that's non-organic. It's one of the herbs that's heavily sprayed as a non-organic herb. So it's bringing in a load of pesticide. The last thing you want to do with a horse who has a leaky gut or an affected gut where the gut is no longer a good, safe barrier, is start bringing in more toxins to the body, right? We don't want to anyway, but especially when they're that ill. Um, and I usually use psyllium husks powder on top of food. The other cool thing that psyllium does is it balances out the uptakes of sugars in the digestive system. So it helps keep blood sugar more level while food is going through the digestive system. And research was done by Dr. Shannon Moreau at Montana State University, oh gosh, like maybe 15 years ago now, on how effective this is. And he really did find that there really is a good effect that psyllium has on the gut. It also helps bulk the stool. The beneficial bacteria, excuse me, throughout the gut really love indigestible fiber. And psyllium is indigestible fiber. Anybody who's taken a full dose of Metamucil the first time they tried Metamucil finds out pretty quickly within a few hours how indigestible it is. Can really cause a lot of bloating. Horses take to it a lot better than humans do. And you can feed up to 2 to 3 tablespoons per meal of psyllium, and you can do it long term. It also is great at clearing sand and dirt from the gut, as well as other things, because it's so good at helping bulk up the stool. One of the reasons it bulks up the stool, again, is because you have more beneficial bacteria, and more bacteria means a bigger stool. The stool, I think in general, is like 65% bacteria. So the more beneficial bacteria, the bigger the stool gets. And that's a good thing, right? We don't want to see little dry balls of poop coming out of our horses. That's a problem. Anyway, so those are the main herbs that I like to get rolling for digestive issues. So how I start, I showed you my soaked hay pellets. I add them to that. Always add your herbs into something damp, even if it just means you throw some water in with your feed, just to get those herbs to stick to the feed so that the horse doesn't stick his nose in the bucket, breathe out, and blow all of the herbs up. It's not where you want the herbs. We want the herbs in the horse, and we don't want them inhaled in the horse because that's not where they're effective. In general, when I start a horse, I start them one herb at a time. And especially, and I'm talking about a really depleted horse who's in trouble. If it's a generally healthy horse, I'll start with a gentle herb blend first. And again, if the horse is picky, remember that pickiness might be the reason they lived. So don't cuss them for being picky. Know that, again, this may be the reason this horse survived and others in his herd did not. And just take it slow with those horses. I have found horses that when I start a new herb, especially the more bitter herbs, like yarrow, that I do literally a pinch in their whole feed pan. Horses, as we know, have the most amazing sense of smell and taste. And those horses who are picky and cautious, if we go slowly with them and let them start feeling like, oh, okay, I ate it and I didn't die. Now I'm eating a little more and I feel the effect, because horses are very aware of the effect of the herbs. They'll very often start craving those herbs and developing a taste for them. As a matter of fact, in general, I find I have a number of clients who tell me their horses canter in from pasture for their herbs. My horses come in very willingly from pasture, and keeping in mind that's about an hour of pasture a day here because our pasture is so thick and lush. Um, that tells me something about how much they appreciate the herbs and how much they like them. Usually I feed herbs 5 or 6 days on and then give a day off. And it's funny, I'll see my horses look at me on the day off when they put their head down in their feed pan and it's just soaked pellets, and then put their head up and look at me like, hey, what's the deal? So that's good. It encourages me to keep going with them. Start slowly with your herbs and work your way up. I usually give it 10 to 14 days until we're up to a full dose. You can back off at any time that you need to. Sometimes we'll see a little bit of a loose stool initially. That shouldn't go on for more than about a day or a day and a half. Usually it might be just 2 piles of poop. And I usually attribute that to the fact that we're changing the microbiome. Um, Things are happening in there. The body is saying, wow, let's get rid of some of this stuff and let's use these new things and start building a better microbiome. Hmm. So, next thing, buy from a trusted company. Everybody's out there selling herbs. You want to definitely go for herbs that are certified organic. One of the things I like about two of the companies I buy from is they have additional certification from Oregon TILF, which is its own in-state certification in the state of Oregon for organic and sustainable growers. Wildcrafted herbs are okay, except that you don't know where they wildcrafted them. That means they picked them somewhere. There's no way to know if they picked them by a roadside that was heavily sprayed or if they went way back into the forest. But again, sustainability is a big deal. Um, there are herbs that are very threatened in the wild, like wild ginseng, golden seal, and maybe even slippery elm now. So be aware. The companies that I really like are Mountain Rose Herbs of Oregon. They're located in Eugene. They were first started by sort of the grandmother of herbalism in the US, Rosemary Gladstar, and she created a wonderful company. I like Star West Herbs of California. Um, they carry non-organic herbs also. So when you're buying your herbs from them, you have to specifically sort by herbs that are certified organic. And Pacific Botanicals of Oregon. There are definitely other good herb companies out there, but those are the ones I buy from most often. Pardon me, my nose is itchy because of this cold. I apologize. Um, so, a few herbs that I avoid in general or I'm cautious about. Devil's Claw is the big one. It's in a lot of herb blends for horses for pain and arthritis. But for a long time, herbalists have believed, and I think rightly so, that devil's claw can irritate an ulcer. So, because so many horses are going to experience ulcers at some point in their life, I don't see any reason to put an herb in their body that may irritate that ulcer. Makes no sense to me, especially when there are so many terrific herbs for pain and specifically for arthritis pain um, that are also healing to the gut. So things like yarrow, boswellia, meadowsweet, all of those are really helpful to an irritated gut instead of working against it. So I just avoid devil's claw completely. Horsetail, strangely enough, despite the name, is toxic to horses. It has high levels of silica. It's pretty indigestible. So it's one that I avoid also. In general, herbs that are dark and don't look right when you get them, call the company, take a picture, get on the phone with them. Good companies will talk with you about this. One of the things I like best about Mountain Rose Herbs is they have an in-house laboratory and they're checking their herbs constantly. Some years ago, I got some herbs that were questionable and they said, please send them back. We will run them through the lab because they smelled moldy to me. And I said, I smell hay every time I feed my horses to make sure that there's no mold that I'm not seeing. And this smells moldy. And they said, send it back. They didn't find any mycotoxins in that batch, but I was really pleased that they were willing to look at it that hard. That said a lot about their integrity to me. In general, your herbs are going to last about a year. So when you're storing those, make sure that the bag they come in, if you're going to keep them in the bag, and the herb companies I buy from use really nice heavy duty Ziploc bags. I squeeze out as much of the air as I can when I'm done taking herbs out of the bag, and then I store them in a dark, cool, dry place. They're dry plant material, just like hay, and you wouldn't store hay where it can get wet either, right? And we try to store hay in a nice dark barn so it keeps its nutritive value. Same thing, same issue. Some companies send their herbs in foil pouches, and these are actually plastic foil pouches that are also Ziploc and resealable. You can put your herbs in canning jars with good tight lids, or used jars with good tight lids. That's a great way to store herbs also. A couple other cautions about a few herbs. One is licorice root. Now, I use licorice root a lot in my practice, and I absolutely love it. It's fabulous for healing the digestive system, and it has a cortisone-like effect. So it's a really awesome anti-inflammatory for all kinds of conditions. And it can boost the adrenals back to health, or help boost the adrenals back to health. But it's a potentiator. And by that, I mean that it creates a stronger reaction in the body to medications. So your veterinarian has prescribed you, let's say, Banamine at a certain dose, and you give them licorice root, and suddenly the dose is bigger because the body's taking it up better. So you really do not want to have licorice root going through a horse at the same time any conventional medication is. I also use licorice root short term in general, because it does stimulate the adrenals, and that's something you don't want to do forever. It helps them heal, but you don't want to keep that cortisone-like effect continuing on indefinitely. Garlic is a fabulous herb, but I wait a little ways down the line to start that. It's wonderful for helping clear out and discourage parasites, phenomenal for immunity. Excuse me, it's good for cleansing the blood, it helps the liver, but it can be a little hot. Excuse me, anybody who's ever taken raw garlic on a little bit of a upset stomach knows exactly what I'm talking about. It can be it can burn a little, literally. And again, slippery elm, which is a wonderful digestive herb, but it's starting to look like it may be threatened or endangered in the wild because of so many wildcrafters going out and stripping bark off trees and stripping off so much that it kills the trees. It's definitely a renewable resource, but it's not renewable in the same way that marshmallow root is, where a stand of marshmallow plants is ready to, harvest roots from in just a couple of years. So it takes a lot longer to grow a tree. Okay, so let's talk about a basic recipe for good digestion. And by the way, Tessa is planning to send out the handout to everybody when we finish. So this recipe is in there. So what I have in this recipe is starting out with 6 ounces of marshmallow root. And when I measure herbs, I use an herb scale, because saying 6 ounces as if we're saying 3/4 of a cup is not the same from herb to herb. Some things sort of take up a measuring cup like a bunch of feathers, and others are really dense. So you're not going to end up with the same comparison. It's just easier to get online, order a little digital scale, I think this cost me $18 5 years ago on Amazon. And I've probably got worn through 3 batteries. That's really saying something. These are hardy little buggers. Plus, they're great for weighing feed. Um, and they're very accurate. You can get down to fractions of ounces with these. So what I do is just take my herbs in a bowl, um, zero out my scale, weigh them, combine them, give them all a good stir. If I have herbs like my calendula and my meadow sweetheart and even my peppermint, I'll run them through a Vitamix or a good coffee grinder. I actually got by for a lot of years before I bought a Vitamix. They're expensive as all get out. Um, they work really well for big quantities of herbs, but just a good little coffee grinder was all I needed for a long time, and it worked really well. I burned through 2 or 3 of them, but at $39 a whack, that's not so bad. They're probably more expensive now, of course. Everything is. Um, so back to the recipe. It's 6 ounces of marshmallow root. It's 4 ounces of peppermint leaf, 3 ounces of meadowsweet, and 3 ounces of calendula. And I feed that 1 to 2 tablespoons per meal, and I'm going to work up to that amount, remember, over 10 to 14 days. And I usually start with about half a teaspoon of the blend when I start a horse on it. Then I'll also add psyllium husks into that. And I forgot to add in here that I usually add salt into the feed as well, because I want to keep encouraging them to drink. As we know, some horses, when they get an upset stomach, just don't want to drink. And that salt will help encourage more drinking. And I usually use a really good Himalayan salt or Redmond mineral salt instead of an iodized salt. Iodized salts can be a little irritating to the gut as well. The mineral salts like Redmond and Himalayan salts are a little more buffered. Plus, they're also getting extra minerals. So, hallelujah, right? Recommended reading. My favorite book of all is, and this is the one that really got me started with horses, is A Modern Horse Herbal by Hilary Page Self. And she wrote it with an English veterinarian. She's a British woman, and it's phenomenal. It's user-friendly as all get out. She tells you the amounts to use, when to use them, when not to use them. And she has a huge list of conditions in here that herbs can be used for. It's really my go-to all the time. Then she followed it up with the veteran horse herbal. So really targeting in on our older horses. And I find that a lot of the veteran horse herbs work really well with depleted, abused horses and neglected horses. So they don't have to be old for a lot of the herbs in this book to apply. There's the Equine Herbal and Energetics book by, let's see, I can never remember, Stacy Small and Andrea Baldwin, another really helpful, informative book. And by energetics, what they're talking about are the basic energetics of an herb. Like I said, how peppermint is cooling, that's an energy. So they talk about cooling, drying, moistening, heating, etc., and balancing that with the horse. But it's also a good compendium of all kinds of herbs and information about them. Finally, Herbs for Pets by Greg Tilford is in my top 4 books. I have a big shelf of herb books, but these are my top 4 for horses. Greg and Mary Tilford used to live here in Montana. I met them, phenomenal herbalists. They love animals. And Greg taught for at least some years the class at Colorado State University for veterinarians. And this was actually the textbook that they used, at least initially. Sorry, itchy nose, I apologize. Anyway, lots of information. And finally, if you folks are interested in future webinars, as Tessa said, up at the top of the chat, I've put in my information. We're going to be doing a series of short webinars this winter. There'll be discussions primarily with equine alternative veterinarians. One of them that I'm looking forward to all of them, don't get me wrong, but I think the one I'm looking forward to most is by a veterinarian who's helped us a lot over the years, Dr. Krista Lorenz. She's going to be talking about treating serious wounds with conventional and alternative medicine, when to do one and when to do the other. Her horse Finn got in a wreck with a gate last year and completely degloved his lower leg, just above between the fetlock and excuse me, the hoof. Yeah, I saw that, Shannon. Oh my God. Yeah, it was a horrible, horrible wreck. Um, and he's back to almost complete soundness. I mean, he severed nerves. He did phenomenal damage. And he was lying there when she found him in the morning with his leg up in the gate. He was upside down. Um, and so it was a months long process. But boy, she said, she really learned a lot as an owner, not just as a veterinarian prescribing things. Um, and I said, you've got to share this with us. And she said, I definitely will. So that'll be a series that I'll be doing through Circle of Life. We'll be talking with other veterinarians, Madeline Ward from Texas, who's an alternative veterinarian, equine vet, who's been practicing for years. She's got a really phenomenal new website. Um, it's called a hub. Okay, this is like way over my technological ability. And she'll be explaining how that works, but it's a resource for horse people. She's giving discounts on memberships to rescue and sanctuary nonprofit groups. And I've been participating in some of the online discussions over the last few months that she's been hosting. And wow, the amount of information that I get from those is just phenomenal. It's been really interesting. So if you want to join us for those, absolutely email me or get on Jane Heath, circleoflife.com and excuse me, register for my e-newsletter. And we'll start sending out the schedule for that, hopefully before Christmas, but I won't promise it. But as I say, that series will be later on this winter. So tell me what questions you have at this point. Oh, great question, Wendy. Um, Other mint family herbs such as catnip. You know, I haven't played with catnip with my horses, but I have a lot of it growing at my place too, because I got too careless when I first planted it. But I have heard of people using catnip as a calming herb with horses. So yeah, and of course the big mint family herb that I absolutely adore, and somebody had asked about herbs for trauma in the registrations is skullcap, and that'd be not Chinese skullcap, but skullcap lateriflora, which is a calming herb, it heals the nervous system, and it's a mint family member, and yeah, I love it. Absolutely. Any other questions right now? Oh, yeah. Good question. Thank you, Vivian. I'm glad somebody asked the itchy question. So, as we know, sometimes itchy is a different reason, is for different reasons. Sometimes it's like allergies or irritation from bugs, um, dry skin, environmental irritants like fly sprays. Um, And one note about fly sprays is you can definitely make organic essential oil fly sprays way cheaper than you can buy them. And I'm happy to share that recipe with that I use with anybody who wants it. Um, I look at the fly spray label and it says, do not let this get on bare skin. What? Oh, my stars. So, anyway, whatever the cause, I think the best thing you can do is make sure that horse's digestive system is in great shape. Seems a little counterintuitive, right? But if the horse does not have leaky gut, if the digestive system is carefully filtering out those bigger proteins and bigger molecules that are not meant to go into the bloodstream, Um, they tend to be less itchy, less allergic. The more good nutrition you can get in the horse, again, same thing, the better they're going to do. Um, Allergies are a huge, deep well, however, and I think mainly the first thing to do is figure out why your horse is itchy, and then go from there. Okay, you've completely flummoxed me on that one, Natalie. We don't have liver fluke in Montana, do we, Wendy? Sorry, Wendy, we can't hear you. Bottom of the
Okay, there we go. Not that I know of. Unless it's something recent that's moved in. I don't think we have liver flukes here, thank goodness.
Okay. Where are you? What state are you in, Natalie? I'm not sure she heard us. So yeah, liver flu. Oh, Ireland. Oh, okay. Wow. The person I would ask is Hillary Page Self. Email her and see what she has to say, because she's in England. And I'm guessing they have them in England as well. You're welcome. Absolutely. Oh, and I just want to add, Wendy, who I just consulted with, is a retired veterinarian. She's on our board of directors. So thank you, Wendy, for pitching in there. I appreciate it. And she's also very good herbalist. Trying to sort out colic-like symptoms that correlate. Oh, yeah. Oh, I love what you're doing to help her. And the main thing with that raspberry leaf is really checking to make sure it's organic. It's going to be a lot more powerful herb if it's organic. Um, and I do love raspberry leaf for those horses. I also really like supporting the liver in horses that have problems with their cycles. So usually for those mares, especially when those hot cycles start kicking in the springtime, I'll start them on milk thistle, but I'll usually keep them also on burdock root or dandelion root throughout the year, just to help keep their liver keeping the whole system working smoothly and well. And um, definitely skullcap is another herb I like for those mares, just because it does have a calming effect in another way, and it's really calming to the nervous system itself, to the central nervous system.
I know that JJ had a question if
Oh,
everything will be in the sheet that you are sharing. I think the handout's pretty comprehensive, but I wanted to make sure.
yeah, I think so. I really talked from the sheets that you guys, or the handout that you guys will get. But certainly, if you have questions, don't hesitate to email me. I'm delighted to answer questions. One of the questions that we got in registration that I definitely wanted to answer was about hoof abscesses. What do I use? I use products by Red Horse. And one of our participants on here today, Mary Vanderveer, turned me on to their products. They're made in England and they're absolutely the best thing I've ever found for hooves. All of the ingredients are natural. Um, and they just work amazingly well. 3 years ago, I adopted a Norwegian fjord horse. And when I brought him home, my farrier took one look and said, I'm sorry, but that horse has the worst feet I've ever seen in 32 years of being a farrier. And he did. I mean, the thrush had eaten so deeply into his feet that we were probably at a paper thin division between the outside and the inside of the hoof. It took us a full 2 years to get him back to health, but boy, those Red Horse products were amazing. They have all kinds of great things, and they'll answer your questions by email, and Sam answers them quickly. I usually find if I have a question for him, he's got an answer back to me in 8 hours. And considering the time difference, that's really amazing. And I'm sure he gets a lot of questions. So their products are just bar none the best of all. And again, you know, if you have a good digestive system, you'll have a healthier hoof and healthier immunity in the body, because the digestive system really is the seat of immunity for the body. It's the gate. Somebody had asked about detox in the registration, and the herbs I like best for detox are milk thistle seed, which I do grind. I want to get as much of that seed into the horse as I can, so that, you know, if they don't fully grind it with their teeth, and it's a hard seed, you know, I'm turning it into a nice sort of granular mixture. But I do put my milk thistle in the freezer in a jar, tightly sealed, as soon as I grind it. And I only grind it for about a week's worth at a time, because it does break down. It's fatty. So you definitely want to protect it as soon as you grind it. I also like burdock. It's a really nice long-term, gentle, just keeps working for the liver and the kidneys kind of herb. And of course, dandelion root as well is another really terrific herb for supporting detox. Somebody had asked also in registration about trauma. And boy, there's no sanctuary or rescue that hasn't dealt with traumatized horses, of course. And usually the first thing I turn to is homeopathic arnica. So that can actually be taken internally, unlike herbal arnica. We don't feed herbal arnica through the mouth. We don't put it on open wounds. But homeopathic arnica that you just get at the health food store is really a great place to start. And you can give a dose once a day for about 3 days to a week. And it helps with emotional as well as physical trauma. So it's not just for the bumps and bruises in life. It's also for the bumps and bruises to the heart and the spirit. And it works really well at just helping them start to move out of that mode and toward healing. But the herbs that I like for trauma definitely are vervain officinalis, eleuthero root, which helps restore the adrenals, and it does it more gently than licorice root does, and skullcap, which is the one I mentioned that's in the mint family. It really helps heal the nervous system and the damage caused by constant stress and trauma to the nervous system. All righty. Any other questions, folks? Or any I missed? Okay.
I think you got them all. Thank you so much, Jane, for all of that incredible information. Lots of nice thank yous in the chat as well. And thank you everybody for being here. Like we said, I have a handout that I'll send out. I'll send out the recording as well, so you can share that with your colleagues, with folks in your barn, with your volunteers, so they can learn more as well. Thanks everybody so much for being here, and happy holidays. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, Jane. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.